We're talking today about genuine spiritual practices and New Age spirituality. With so many offerings for self-development, how can a genuine spiritual seeker choose something guaranteed to work? Well, Tantra teacher Morgan Arundel is here to help us through the maze of choices. Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you, Vivian.
So, is this an area of interest for you?
Yeah, it is, I would say. I've always been curious about different spiritual traditions, and even from quite a young age. But something I observed was there seemed to be a bit of a contradiction between the path that person represented and who they were as a person and how they behaved. And so this gave me, I guess, made me look for the sort of authenticity of a path, and so of a spiritual teaching. What were its roots, and what was the real purpose behind it, and so I started to kind of look for that, and I had a great interest in making this distinction between something that was just appealing and interesting, or and having some benefits, but something that was complete and whole and had a certain integrity. So so I was very interested in trying to understand that from an early age. Yeah.
So how can a genuine spiritual seeker find something that's guaranteed to work?
Yeah, guaranteed. Well, I don't think there's any guarantees in life. And actually that does raise a point that I also observed, is that no matter how valid a system is, there are always going to be those that misinterpret it, exaggerate the practices, or just simply don't follow the practices. They might preach it, but they don't live it. So you'll always find that with any path, with any teaching, and so that's something kind of to bear in mind on your journey.
Have you had experiences of people who are like, I need something that works. I'm not going to participate in this unless there's a guarantee it will work.
Yeah, definitely, and that's where also an understanding that there are some mechanisms at play here, and that's where it's very good to have that learning, that understanding, that teaching, that there are things that, like, this is something that people have done for eons. I mean, ever since we've been, the whole history of evolution has been a process of how do we improve ourselves, how do we get to know ourselves deeper, how do we, leading to the deeper and deeper questions of why am I here in this world, and what's it all about, and what's the meaning of my life, and is there something beyond the senses and beyond death, and so on. And they've been leading us to those kind of deeper, more meaningful questions. So I think there's a search that's kind of always been going on. Yeah.
So how can you find a genuine spiritual practice?
First of all, it's to know what they are. What is a genuine spiritual practice, and what is not? Because in our modern times we've encountered what is referred to as the kind of New Age spirituality, and this is a phenomenon that's emerged in the 20th century. It's very much a kind of a mishmash of different religious and esoteric traditions from around the world. It's taking kind of truths and practices and kind of putting them together. So I think it's and we're confronted with that. And then we have these traditional systems, very much, which are often represented through religions, the great religions of the world, and their various branches. And so I think the way we find a genuine system is first by understanding the difference between them and what they are. Yeah.
What's present amongst ancient traditions that makes it different from New Age practices?
So I would highlight three different aspects. The first are the origins. So the genuine and traditional practices are rooted in ancient traditions. They have a very solid doctrinal support there. so ancient texts and teachings. While the New Age is something that is more modern phenomena, and it's, as I said before, it's kind of a bit of an eclectic collection of different traditions. So the depth there is a little different. The approach is also different between the two. In the genuine traditional paths, there is very much an emphasis on self-discipline and on a long-term commitment to a practice and to a path. So it's implying a very systematic and long-term kind of committed practice. Whereas the New Age spirituality is a little more individualistic, it's a little more consumer-oriented, it's a little more in line with getting the quick results, you know. You've seen it when you go online, it's like there's another teacher there with the breath technique. This is the one, and this is the breath technique. This is the one that does it. This is the best one. In just practicing this in 2 weeks, you can transform your immune system, and you can have states that those people who've been meditating for 20 years can achieve. And there's always the next kind of instant phenomena, and it's very hard. That's just the way we work as human beings. We're attracted to those things. We look for the kind of a quick fix. So I think the New Age is a little bit more along those lines, without considering the depth of practice and the commitment that's needed to really have genuine and lasting transformations. So often the New Age is spirituality, or approach to it is very much about well-being and personal development. Whereas the genuine spiritual traditions are, their purpose, I would say, is more about transcending the individual, personal transcendence. And it also has a very big emphasis on what you're connecting to the greater whole, to that universal consciousness or that universal being or truth that is there. Whereas the New Age spirituality, the approach there and the purpose is somehow more individualistic. So it's and when I say individualistic, it's not just in sense of something that's, an action that's very independent, someone who's independent in their actions and in their thoughts, but more in the sense of giving a priority to their personal interests as opposed to those of a collective. And so the approach in New Age tends to be much more on what can you get out of it rather than what is your integration into the bigger picture and your connection to the universal aspects here. So yeah, there's a difference.
So New Age will be using tools and techniques in order to make themselves more successful in their earthly life, whereas traditional spiritual practices would be doing what?
That does tend to be an emphasis, like from the New Age practices, like how you can get the perfect job and how you can have great health and how you can have a good relationship and maybe these kind of things. And so there can be a bit more of an emphasis on your worldly experience, whereas the traditional practices would tend to emphasize the reality beyond that, and that those things are valuable and valid, of course, and useful, but not to lose sight of the goal, which is to realize your essential nature, which is different and separate and completely independent from any of those worldly experiences.
So more profound happiness rather than ephemeral happiness.
Yeah, you might say that when it's focused more on the worldly experience, it's much more conditioned. You're happy if you're successful in your job. You're happy if you're successful in your, you buy that, you get the house that you always dreamed of, and you're happy if the environment, the situations around you are good and are suitable. Whereas a deeper approach would be there is a happiness, an unconditional happiness that you can reach that is completely independent of your outer environment, and that only happens through a very deep realization of your essential nature, and that is the purpose, and that's the only purpose of a genuine spiritual path.
Sounds to me like the ego is very subtle. It's operating in a fairly sneaky manner in perhaps in some of these New Age practices. I'm harnessing these energies for my well-being.
Yeah.
You'll often hear that. There's not a higher intention there or a higher purpose.
Yeah, and that's why is that a problem? Because it would be an obvious question to say, well, what's wrong with being healthy and happy and in your relationships and things? Well, nothing inherently, but as long as what you're doing in the efforts that you are making, from at least if you're interested in genuine spiritual transformation, are integrated into a deeper path. And sometimes what you see on a very deep and profound path and what you find on a superficial approach to spirituality, they look the same.
Yes, they use the same language very often, sometimes similar techniques.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. But there is an integration into something deeper, and sometimes it can be missing very often in these superficial approaches to spirituality. And that can mean very subtle differences in the way you are approaching your life experiences, the way you approach your relationship. For example, you want a healthy relationship, a romantic relationship, and you want healthy and fulfilling erotic experiences. And great, that's a wonderful thing to go for, to long for, to strive for. The tantric tradition would say that those practices would necessarily form part of your spiritual practices. So you have that relationship, and that relationship can be used as a spiritual tool where the two of you transform together in a faster way than you would by yourself. So you see, on the outside, they both look for, or it looks like you're achieving healthy, happy relationships. One of them, that's the goal in and of itself, and the other, it's a goal so that relationship is then used in a way like a vehicle for deeper transformation. So you see there's a subtle difference there, even though they might look the same kind of on the outside.
It's very subtle, so that the spiritual seeker really has to do a lot of work.
Yes, they do. And indeed, that is always present in the traditional systems. There is an emphasis on a deep commitment, a long-term commitment, and on serious self-discipline. And you often find that when people come to when they discover a really genuine path, it looks very nice on the surface, but then when they realise how much work is involved, it's like, maybe I'll go and try something else. And that is perhaps one of the pitfalls of the New Age spirituality, is that it's emphasising do what feels right for you, which again is fine. However, there's another part. Do what's right for you, what feels right for you, as long as that actually takes you to the transformation that's really needed. And so very often...
the second bit is often left out.
Exactly. And that's what we find with these more superficial approaches, is that it takes something from the surface and just leaves the deeper part. So that might lead people to trying many different things. And again, in itself, there's not a problem with that. But because it's nice to try many different things, maybe you find an approach that suits you better, that's is more appropriate for your particular body and emotional, mental kind of makeup. And so it's nice to do that, and it's valuable to do that. But you should only do that if it's not in conflict with going deeper. So if you're just moving from one thing to another and that's preventing you from taking one thing and going deeper, then that's a problem, because the depth is where real transformation, permanent, long-lasting, deep transformation takes place, not just in trying many things. Yeah.
So if you come up against a barrier, you don't go to another school or try another tradition, you stick with it.
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, I wouldn't put it quite so black and white as that, because maybe you do need to change. But what I would say is that be aware of that as a mechanism, that try different things, but not to the detriment of going deep. If you're not finding something, if you've tried 10 different things and you haven't found something to go deep, then it's time to find something. Just pick something and go deep with it. Yeah, and that's where you've got to stick at it. Yeah.
Now, these days there seems to be quite a lot of criticism against some of the ancient traditions. They're described as misogynistic, out of date, oppressive.
Yeah.
But what would you say to that?
So, yeah, well, some of the criticisms, from some perspectives, could be valid in the sense that when some of these practices are approached and taught and kind of manifested in a very dogmatic way, then that is a problem. So, genuine spiritual traditions, there is an emphasis on understanding the universal principles there. And those principles are beyond any path, beyond any particular approach or particular practices, beyond any cultural beliefs or anything individual or subjective. They are universal and they're timeless. And a genuine spiritual path would put you in touch with those principles. And then they, of course, are unfolding into specific mechanisms. You know, what is the process of transformation? What is the way that we, the process of the ego, and how is the structure of our emotions and of our mind in relation to our body and to our consciousness, and all of these things. So the problem with these criticisms is that they tend to disregard those universal principles and perhaps are looking just at some of the ways in which those practices are presented. And I would say that whenever there is something that is a practice that is done where it's not connecting to one of those principles, that is a problem. Yeah, and maybe that is something that is a bit oppressive or restricting or limiting. A great example is in the yogic tradition, the practices of the yamas and niyamas. They are the moral and ethical guidelines. Now, I would say that from this very traditional, genuine approach to the yogic path, one would govern their behaviours by understanding why it is that behaviour is beneficial. You know, what is the principle that behaviour relates to, and not just doing it because it says so in that book, or because that teacher said so, or because that's what you have to do to belong to that particular path. So,
can you remind us of some of the yamas and niyamas?
For example, non-violence, or truthfulness, or purity, or others is kind of connected to self-control. So if we go about doing some kind of behaviours without really understanding the reason why, then that leads to dogma. And I would say that some religions in particular are guilty of that. Yeah. So a more genuine approach is to connect the practices back to those universal principles, and they are unchanging. And I would say that it's misguided to say that these things are outdated. I would say this is coming from not having an understanding of those universal principles. Those things never change. They're eternal. How they apply in a certain environment or culture or a particular group of people, okay, those things can adapt and evolve. But it's a little bit like the throwing the baby out with the bathwater syndrome. You find some things that are dirty, that need cleaning up, and you just try and throw away the whole thing. So I would say these criticisms which say that these things are archaic and out of date, this is a misguided criticism based on not understanding the universal principles that those practices relate to. Now, does that mean that all of the ways that those practices are done are good? Not necessarily. Maybe they've become a little dogmatic. Maybe they've become, a little rigid in the way they've been approached. Yeah. So I think that's an understanding that people need to have. That's not so clear for many people.
And what about New Age practices? Do they put up moral guidelines or principles, or how do they relate to ethics?
Well, in the same way, I guess they have the same kind of, they're still there, and perhaps because of this eclectic nature of the New Age approach to spirituality, which is taking from many different traditions, the risk there is that you are disconnected from the root, what is the origin of those practices. And so the danger might be that one takes on a certain behavior without truly understanding the origin of that behavior. What is the principle that it relates to? So I think that's where that could be an issue. Yeah.
And the principles and practices, of course, have been done over many years, centuries, and they're tried and tested, whereas New Age is only really a few decades.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, that doesn't mean that what it has is not valid or is not real, but it just means that a traditional practice is something that has been passed down for millennia, and there is something there. We have arrived at this place in our modern times because of the evolution, because of those teachings. And so to just kind of disregard all of that is a little exaggerated.
In both paths, where does the power lie?
And what do you mean exactly?
It's kind of like, where is the voice of authority coming from? Where is the source of that authority and power?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, right. Because in traditional paths, that would be the place that's held by the guru or the master or the spiritual guide. We do find a bit of a backlash to that because in the New Age approach, it might be that you are your own guide, and that thing with the master is just old and out of date, and actually you are your own guide. Again, this approach falls into the same trap of just taking a kind of a superficial layer, because it's true to a certain extent. Yes, ultimately you can be your own guide, and that's where you want to get to. But there is a level that you need to get to before you can trust in the guidance of your own intuition and feelings. When you get to the level where you are truly a master of your own energies, of your own desires, of your own fears, of your own projections, of your own ego expressions and protective and defensive mechanisms, of your own consciousness, when you're the master of these things, then sure, you are ready to follow the true and undisturbed and unfiltered guidance of your soul or of your spirit. Until that point, it's very helpful to have a guide. And that's where the traditional systems, where the role of some kind of spiritual guide would be at play there. See, the problem with this is that with spiritual transformation, we are going beyond the known. We're entering realms that can't be understood by the normal mind, the reasoning, rational mind. And that's a very kind of unknown and mysterious place. And it's much more helpful if we have someone who's been there before that would show us how to navigate that area. I'll give you an example. You're going on a journey. It's a great analogy that's used often in spirituality, that of climbing a mountain. And that is analogous to the spiritual journey. Reaching the summit being reaching the peak of spiritual enlightenment. And let's say on that journey, you travel for 1,000 kilometers, and then there's a cliff where you need a 40-meter rope. Now, if you don't know that that's coming up, you didn't prepare beforehand with that 40-meter rope, you've got to travel 1,000 kilometers back to the beginning, get the rope and bring it with you. You wouldn't think to take it from the beginning and carry this thing all the way there just for that part of the journey. Now, if someone's been there before, they can say, hey, listen, 1,000 kilometers up the road, you're going to encounter this situation where you'll need this 40-meter rope, so you better carry it now. And in the beginning, you'll say, oh, come on, I can't see any place where I need that. That's ridiculous. I don't want to carry that. It's pointless. But if someone has been there before, you can follow that advice, you can take it, and then when you get there, you're prepared. So it's a little bit like that. Having someone who's been there is helping us be prepared with the things that we'll need when we get to places that we don't even know exist yet. Now, can you do that by yourself? Well, possibly. but that's going to be a lot of trial and error, and that might be a very inefficient path, and even a dangerous path. And yeah.
One of the concepts that New Age practices use is self-actualization.
Yeah.
This idea that, I can actualize myself, I can become myself, I can know myself, I can transcend myself.
Yeah.
How realistic is that?
Well, I think without having a deeper understanding and even guidance into that realm that you're transcending into, it can be very difficult. Sometimes these approaches, as I said before, the New Age approach is kind of falling into a bit this trap of just taking off a surface layer of truth and ignoring some of the depth. And so a great example is this film that came out many years ago, the one that was actually about resonance, and it was talking about the law of attraction, that you can basically attract anything to you. But again, it was somehow missing the integration into the universal will. It was simply just about your will. If you will it and you think about it long enough and hard enough and feel it, you'll attract it towards you. But maybe there's also something else there. And so the New Age approach would tend to ignore that something else, that universal will. And how is that individual desire integrated into that universal one? So the genuine spiritual practices very much have that as their purpose, your integration into this universal will. And so that self-actualization or achievement that you might accomplish is something that's transcended, and that's not even very important. And that's why you will have certain approaches to genuine spiritual paths where there isn't any integration in the social world or in the material world. They're actually almost stepping out of it because it's not needed in order to reach those deep spiritual realities and truths. Yeah. So they can be a trap, actually. Yeah.
So now the million-dollar question: how can you choose a path that is guaranteed to work?
Yeah, that is a million-dollar question. There is a saying in spirituality, which is that a tree is known by its fruits. And in other words, when we apply it to a spiritual path, if you see people who are living what they preach or what they study, who are genuinely happy, who are genuinely good people, manifesting the qualities of goodness and kindness and love in their life and understanding, who have the ability to take on other perspectives, to see another person's point of view, who take everything in the spirit of learning and transforming and evolving, and who have this deep harmony in their life, even if their life is not perfect, but who are actually living those high spiritual states, those more expanded and deeper states of consciousness, of even states of ecstasy and cosmic consciousness that are described in those texts, then I would say that's a good path. So we look for the fruits, we look for and that's a good path. If you find beings who are having those kind of results, then you can be sure that it's a path worth following.
Morgan, thank you very much for guiding us through the maze.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. At Tara, our mission is to make genuine spiritual knowledge available for all those who aspire for spiritual development and transformation. If you enjoyed this discussion, please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel.